The 17th century English philosopher John Locke is to be remembered for his wise and brilliant contributions to three great issues that continue to concern us to this day: how we should educate our children, who should rule over us, and what we should do about people who have different religious ideas to us. Locke was born into a quiet Somerset village in 1632. He was 10 years old when the English Civil War broke out, and his father became a captain in the parliamentary army. King Charles I was publicly executed in 1649, just a few feet away from where Locke was studying at Westminster School. The screams of the crowds heard in the library marked him deeply. Locke went on to study medicine at Oxford and planned to be a doctor, but his life changed significantly when by chance he became acquainted with the dashing and highly ambitious Whig politician Anthony Ashley Cooper, known as the first Earl of Shaftesbury, who'd come to Oxford to look for a cure for a liver disease he had. Cooper suggested that Locke move to London to become part of his household. The offer was hard to resist, and once part of Cooper's entourage, Locke began to participate in the great scientific, educational, religious, and political debates of the day. Along the way, he also helped to cure Shaftesbury of his liver complaint, earning his lifelong gratitude. The first question Locke grew fascinated by was what to do with people who don't agree with your religious views. In breaking away from the Catholic Church under Henry VIII in the 16th century, English Protestantism had started a process of noisy questioning of religion that couldn't now easily be stopped. Because this was threatening to get out of hand, there were arguments that there should be total government control over religion and a hard crackdown on dissenters. But Locke became one of the foremost advocates of freedom of belief in his beautiful Essay Concerning Toleration, written in 1667. Here he advocated toleration on the basis of 3 points. Firstly, because earthly judges, the state in particular and human beings in general, cannot dependably evaluate the truth claims of competing religious standpoints. Secondly, even if they could, enforcing a single true religion would never work, because you can't be compelled into belief through violence. And thirdly, coercing religious uniformity leads to far more social disorder than allowing diversity. Locke argued that the ultimate aim of the state was just to preserve the quiet and comfortable living of men in society, but that it hath nothing to do with the good of men's souls. Religion was a personal choice, and churches were voluntary organizations which could set their own rules and be left to it. It was thanks to Locke's influence that the idea of locking up people for their beliefs fell entirely out of favor. By the 18th century, other European nations looked with envy at England, a place where what you happened to believe was simply deemed irrelevant to your status or prospects. This was a truly remarkable achievement for one book by one man to have set in train. But Locke didn't stop there. In 1689 he published a second extraordinary book, The Two Treatises of Government. This tried to answer the question of who should rule the country and on what legitimate basis. One common yet increasingly fanciful notion at the time was that political authority derived directly from God. But a more recent explanation from Thomas Hobbes had asserted that the totalitarian power of kings was justified by their ability to keep order and prevent repetitions of the chaos that had reigned, Hobbes had insisted, in the time before powerful governments, and that he had called the state of nature. By painting the state of nature in the darkest colours, Hobbes had asked his readers to set themselves low expectations for what a decent ruler was meant to be. Anything better than the savagery of the Stone Age was legitimate, and rulers had no responsibility to guarantee religious freedom or human rights. But now, in the first treatise, Locke thoroughly demolished the scriptural claim that God had created kings, and in the second treatise he took on Hobbes's ideas about the state of nature. Locke agreed with Hobbes that before and without government there would have been a state of nature, but he disagreed what this place would actually have been like. He argued that it would have been broadly peaceful, and that in agreeing to submit to governments, people had therefore not fearfully agreed to surrender all their rights. In fact, they possessed a range of inalienable or natural rights that no ruler could ever take away. Locke insisted that people had voluntarily consented to cede some of their personal freedoms, but only insofar as it better preserved their rights. They couldn't be expected to give up these rights entirely, as that would just defeat the point of joining society in the first place. If a ruler started to act like a tyrant and unfairly deprived their subjects of their freedom or property, the subjects were then entirely within their rights to withdraw their consent, overthrow their ruler, and set up a new government. Locke's work hugely influenced the development of Western societies, and in particular the American Declaration of Independence. For example, in its insistence on the separation of church and state, and in the Second Amendment's right to bear arms, a clear descendant of Locke's view that a people should always retain both the right and the means to overthrow government. Locke made one other great innovation, this time in education, in his book Some Thoughts Concerning Education of 1693. This was possibly the most influential book on education ever written. In 1684, an aristocrat called Edward Clarke asked Locke for advice on raising his son and heir. Though he was unmarried and never had children of his own, and by all accounts didn't actually enjoy their company that much, Locke responded with a series of letters that he eventually turned into a book. Locke began by saying that all of us start off in life with minds that are blank, tabula rasa, he called them, in another famous work, his Essay Concerning Human Understanding of 1689. The idea ran contrary to prevailing views that our minds are fitted at birth with all sorts of ideas about religion, ethics, morality, and government. Locke argued that everything we think, believe, know, or conjecture is actually derived from experience, from the simple ideas we receive from sensations in the outside world, or internal reflections on the processes of our own understandings. Led Locke to the belief that education was absolutely crucial to how people turn out. I think I may say that of all the men we meet with, 9 parts of 10 are what they are, good or evil, useful or not, because of education. Locke believed that we are very vulnerable to the ideas that people place in our minds when we're children. He wrote, "The little and almost insensible impressions on our tender infancies have very important and lasting consequences." He argued that the association of ideas that one makes when young are more important than those made later because they are the foundations of ourselves. So he warned famously against letting a foolish maid convince a child that goblins and spirits are associated with the night, for darkness shall ever afterwards bring with it those frightful ideas. Locke is the forerunner of our own parenting techniques, in which we proceed under the assumption that everything that happens to a child, whether they have a nice time at the zoo with us or get enough cuddles at the age of 4, plays an enormous role in later life. These ideas didn't pop into our heads just like that. Without us necessarily knowing it, they are the work of a gaunt, wise philosopher of 17th century England. Locke also had some fascinating thoughts about what should be on the educational curriculum. He hated the idea of children learning what he called useless subjects, like Latin, Greek, music, or poetry, only to study what would be of practical assistance to them later in life, which meant science, ethics, business, and what we nowadays call psychology, instructions on how we can best calm ourselves, be kind, and understand others. He wanted, though he didn't directly use the phrase, that we should study at schools of life. Locke died in October 1704. He was one of the most famous men in Europe and continues to influence us hugely to this day. It is because of him that we believe in religious toleration, that we believe that governments should not tyrannize their subjects, and that we try so hard to give our own children good childhoods.